Today I'm chatting with Tracey McLennan. She has a master's in applied animal behaviour and training. She's had her research published in a well-respected and peer-reviewed journal and has lived with high prey-drive dogs who have killed and eaten prey, as well as dogs who've run off hunting for hours at a time. She successfully trained each of these dogs she's lived with and hundreds more. She has a massive passion for improving the lives of people and dogs by helping them understand more about their dog's prey drive and how to work with the dog rather than trying to suppress it. If your dog is all ears until they've seen, heard, or smelled prey, this is for you. So, first of all, hi Tracy, and thank you for offering your time to do one of these chats with us. We're really excited to learn more about you and what you do. So, first of all, can you tell our viewers a little bit about you and why you specialise in prey driving dogs?
Hi, I would love to. I'm Tracy, and the reason I focus on prey-driving dogs is because I had a dog whose prey drive was ruining my life, and it was very hard to find help with him. So I went on a little bit of a voyage of discovery with that dog, where I learned how to be able to take him on walks without them making me cry every time. And then also, I'm very interested in the academic side of dog training as well. So I did a master's degree and I finished that 2 years ago, and I did some research. I focused on prey drive in my master's degree, and I did my research for my dissertation. My research was then published by a journal, and I now occasionally do some peer reviewing for the journal. And I run a membership for people with dogs who have high prey drives. So I'm just quite obsessed with it. I now have 2 working Cocker Spaniels, a breed that I chose primarily because they almost always have a fairly high prey drive, and so I felt as though they would be a good match for me. So that's pretty much why I do the work that I do.
Awesome, perfect. Okay, and for us, Tug and Prey, it's so linked together. At the end of the day, I say this to customers all the time that we are tapping into that prey drive. So it's really good for people to understand why, what it is, and because it probably has some negative connotations as well sometimes, and I'm sure you probably come across that quite a bit. So, can you try and explain what prey drive is and how owners can spot in their own dogs?
Absolutely. In its the simplest way I can put it is prey drive is your dog wanting to do something with prey. Like really being very highly motivated to do something with prey. That's what the drive bit means. It just means you're strongly motivated. So the dogs with a high drive will be the dogs who will probably run through a thorny bush and not really notice. Or the dogs who run a long, long way to get to prey without stopping, and they tune everything else out around them. That's what the drive part means. And prey, it's just, it could be almost any sort of other animal or bird, typically not other dogs and typically not human beings. Those are unusual, usually other sorts of animals and birds. The dogs will direct their drive towards that. So that's fundamentally it. Now, recognising it in dogs is a bit more complicated because there are a lot of parts to it. So there are 10. I think there's probably more than 10 parts to it. But more research is badly needed. So the 10 parts that we would commonly include are hunt or search. People call it either, where the dogs are trying to find prey. That's the very start. Then they will locate it and start moving themselves towards it. They call that orienting. Then some dogs will stare at it very hard. Probably see collies doing that a lot, and they call that eye. Some dogs will stalk the prey, so they look a bit like the big cats you would see on wildlife programs. They're crouched down and they're stalking towards. I most often see that in setters and pointers, and sometimes border collies as well. But those sorts of dogs are the most common ones that I would see stalking prey. Then you'll get the chase. That's what everybody knows about, chasing. And after the chase, so if the dog is then gets close to the prey animal, they might grab them, they might do a grab bite, so that's a hard bite to disable the prey and make it be still. They might do a kill bite, which is what you might see with terriers, and the dogs often do it with toys. They'll hold them in their mouths and shake their head really vigorously. That's a kill bite. Yep.
So what you kind of hear people say, like ragging kind of thing, really.
Yes, ragging. Yes,
Yeah.
that's that part of the sequence. Some dogs will be like my spaniels, and they will just pick up very gently and hold, and that's a possess thing. And often for those dogs, they might not want to give the thing back. Like the retrieving breeds are bred to want to hold, have and hold, but you have to teach them to retrieve. Mostly they just want to have the thing. And then the last two bits that are quite uncommon in dogs when it comes to prey are dissect. Lots of dogs like to rip toys apart, but it's much less common for them to do that with prey animals, even if they have caught them. And then consume is the final bit, eating. Which obviously, if they were still wild predators, that would be the whole point of it. But our dogs are really, we've manipulated them through selective breeding to alter that, because we want them to do jobs for us, and none of those jobs involve them eating the prey. So
I see. So when you mentioned about the dissection then, and at that stage of it, and then you don't see that very often actually happening very often. Is that because of how we've domesticated them and bred that out of it, really?
Yes. There's been a lot of effort made to breed those last two stages out of dogs, because they don't, like, dogs are typically, when they're bred to use their prey drive, it's usually to help people hunt for animals, so like the gun dogs, and some of the hounds as well help people hunt for animals in some way, or look after livestock, so your collies and your shepherds look after livestock. Now, in none of those jobs is it at all useful if the dog spends time pulling apart and then eating, even if the intention is that they kill the prey animal. Nobody wants them pulling them apart and eating them. They want them then to get on and do your job again with the next one. And it's the terriers that are the ones that we'd be expected to be killing small animals. Lots of effort has been put into breeding those last two bits out of the way. It does happen. If anybody's listening and saying, "Oh, but my dog does them all," yes, 100%. I've lived with a dog that did them all. My very first dog, he did the whole thing, and he only was interested in prey because he thought he could eat it. So 100% some dogs do it, but it's not as common.
And I suppose really in terms of thinking about play and tug and that type of thing, that's why it's really important for when we're tapping into that prey drive with dogs, that we kind of look at that release cue and how we can build that into the training to make sure that we're I think that's really important.
Yes, it's very important. It really helps as well to build a partnership, to be able to give the dog something that they like, and have that be a cooperative thing helps to build a partnership, rather than what often happens with prey, in my experience, is we try and keep the dogs away from it and don't necessarily give them something to do that's meaningful to that dog. And that's why it becomes a problem, because the dog desperately is trying to meet this need that often has been carefully bred into them by not necessarily the person with the dog, but by generations of dog breeders have been carefully breeding this into the dog. And then we go, I just want to walk around the park with my dog, and I don't want them going off and doing that. And when no meaningful alternative is offered to the dog, then more problems can arise. They can become obsessed or reactive or start resource guarding. All sorts of things can go wrong when the outlets aren't meaningful. But yes, and you can add training in when you're using toys. You can add things in like release cues and building in some impulse control, and that helps when they inevitably come across live prey, which they will.
If you can't stop that happening,
No, you can't. People often ask me how, and I say, I don't know. I don't know how you could ever do that. I don't know I can't picture where you would have to be living to make that possible. But it's not possible for me, certainly.
No. So what are some of the myths about prey drive that you'd like people to understand. So I guess some of the things that people assume is that might be wrong, or might be right.
There are lots of myths. Probably the most important one for the purposes of this chat is the myth that if you give dogs an outlet, it makes things worse. So that's one of the biggest things that people will say to me. I go on and I say, oh, you need to give them outlets. And people will immediately say to me, I don't want to do that because I feel like I'm going to encourage the behaviour if I let them chase or if I let them search for things. I feel that I'm going to encourage the very behaviour that I don't want to see. And we know that we shouldn't be doing that. So I don't want to give them outlets. That's one of the main myths. And the reason it's a myth is, so we know there's been a lot of research done into animal behaviour, and we know from that research that a really good way of making dogs want things more, especially instinctive things like prey drive, is to deprive them of it. So the early animal behaviour scientists, when they were starting to learn about how to teach rats to press levers and how to get rats to run around mazes, when they were doing all of those early studies, they would train hungry rats because they wanted the rats to feel motivated to figure out that if they pressed on a lever, they would get food, because it's quite, there's a lot of mental energy involved in that. So to make sure the rats were suitably motivated, they weren't starving to death or anything, but they would make sure they were hungry.
Yes.
And similarly, if they wanted them to do something that involved them moving, they would keep them in a smaller cage before the experiment started, because if they did that, then after the confinement, the rats would want to move. So we know that if we remove access to instinctive behaviour, it makes the desire stronger. But that's what everybody does. That's what almost everybody does with prey drive. They remove access and they hope that if they replace it with something that's nothing like what the dog wants to do with prey, that somehow that will fix the problem. Like something like, I don't know, licking a licky mat, or licking or sniffing, going on a little sniffing walk. Those are good things to do with dogs, but they don't replace the prey drive. And until that need is addressed, if the dog's got a lot of drive, it will get worse. What you end up with is those dogs where as soon as people step outside the door, the dog is instantly scanning. And if they see anything at all, they lose their mind immediately. There's no option. And that makes training difficult, because it cuts down on the time that you would have to do something different, and it makes the dogs less likely. It also makes the dogs less likely to engage with the person, because all the person does is stop them. So
stop them doing what they want to do.
What they want to do, rather than figuring out what do they want to do, and then finding ways to help them do that.
Yeah, and I guess that's where always bring it back to play. And actually, do you know what? And I've said it before in this chat, that's what I talk to people all the time, is that's what you're doing. You're giving the dog an outlet to display that behaviour, because that's what they want to do. And it's not necessarily going, because we hear this as well, where people say that, I don't want my dog chasing things, so I can't play with a chaser toy, or those types of things. But actually, the dog is likely to try and find an outlet anyway. So if you just work with it rather than against it, you're both going to have a much better time, aren't you, really?
100%. It's just going to be easier if you know your dog loves to chase. Then using a chaser toy is got to be better than trying to stop them, because there's something to chase everywhere. I've got, my youngest dog is a puppy, and he would literally chase, which is this is normal for puppies. It's not necessarily an indication of a high prey drive. He would chase anything at the moment, a leaf, anything at all, he would chase. And that's just normal for puppies, but you can get some adult dogs that are like that as well. And if they are, you need to do something to give them a way of meeting that, because it is a need for them. It's not just for the dogs with a lot of drive, it's more of a need than just something they quite like doing. You kind of there's a whole range. There are some dogs. My sister's cockapoo, she encourages him to chase birds all the time, and for him it's just a mildly fun thing to do. If
Okay.
you ask him not to do it, he just stops immediately, because for him, eating a biscuit's way better than chasing a bird. He will chase them, but it's not, I wouldn't describe it as a need for him. If he never chased anything again, it wouldn't make any difference to him. But for dogs with a lot of drive to do something, like my little cocker, if I didn't let her hunt and use her nose to search for things, my older cocker, we would very quickly have a difficult relationship with each other. And she would take any opportunity she could to run away to meet her hunting meat.
So I suppose really one question, this might be a bit of a controversial question in terms, but for people who really, struggle with it, is there a way that you can train that prey drive out of a dog?
I don't know that I've found. It's part of who they are. So people do ask me that all the time. And it is a bit like saying, I know that my dog doesn't really like eating kibble and they'd much prefer to eat some sort of fresh cooked food. Is there a way to train them to prefer kibble? Probably not. And it's prey drive is similar. There's not a way to train it out in the same way as there's not a way to train out food preferences. You're kind of, that's the dog you've got. What you can do is train them to do things that are like that you like more. You can work with them to direct their prey drive in ways that are more that you see as more socially appropriate. They certainly can do that, but you can't get rid of the drive. And there's always a point with all dogs. There's always a point where they are just going to take off if they're too close, if you're not quick enough, depending on their drive and the individual dog.
Yeah,
there's a point.
And I guess that all comes into that recall training as well, doesn't it? Really, in terms of being able to mitigate against some of those things that happen.
You have to be, I always feel it's useful to be realistic. There was a police dog in Scotland up in Inverness recently who was lost overnight. And what had happened was she was being walked on a normal walk. It looked like quite an isolated area. She flushed a deer and took off after the deer and wasn't found until the next day. That was a fully trained operational police dog who I would imagine the person exercising the dog was trying to recall her, and she was off. Now, it is possible that she got so far away that she became lost and it took her a while to figure out how to get back. But there was a point for a recall. I would imagine, none of the articles mentioned, but I would imagine that the person with the dog was trying to call her back. Yeah. And so there was a point where they will tune everything else out around them to let them focus fully on what they're doing with the prey, and that's probably what happened with that dog. So that's just like normal. It's just part of having a dog, is that they may be like that, and the way to avoid those like awful situations is to understand the dog that you have and where it may and may not be safe to have them off lead. Because there's no such thing as 100% recall. I know people say, oh yes, unless they've got 100% recall. But these are living animals. Yeah. And there's no 100%. And
there's always, when you think about it yourself as well, there's always things that you're always going to cave into and give into.
100%. And even with, I worked and still work with computers, and they are 100% obedient. They always do exactly what you tell them to do, always. I would no more guarantee that a system change would work exactly as expected than I would fly through the air. And even under a lot of pressure, in the past, I have been threatened with the sack for not promising something. But even under a lot of pressure, I wouldn't, because you can't. And if you can't promise it with with something like a computer, you definitely can't with a dog. So there's always a judgment call involved, and there's always an element of risk. But that's the same with absolutely everything in life. There's nothing at all that's not like that. So I don't tend to worry overly much about that.
Okay, so we touched a little bit on outlets, or giving dogs outlets just a moment ago, and you did a blog on outlets for prey drive. I think it'd be helpful for people to have actual things that they could do if their dog has a high prey drive. Anything you can suggest?
Well, yes, loads. Let me try and keep it reasonably brief. So, a couple of things. When I researched this, I found that most dogs really enjoy searching or hunting in some way. So, for some dogs, they like to use their eyes, other dogs like to use their nose. Some dogs, the Podencos in particular, it's clearly their hearing.
Okay.
They've got these great big ears, and you can see them listening to little creatures in usually in long grass. So hunting is a really important thing, and that's all about searching. So using toys that can be hidden, like the smaller toys that can be hidden from the dog, and allowing them to search them out, or for the dogs that like to look, using blue or white coloured toys because they are more visible to dogs, and just putting them somewhere where the dog's going to be able to see them, especially if they've already got a good history of playing with that toy, and then letting them find them and do what they want with them. So that's a really good outlet for a lot of dogs. A massive amount of dogs really enjoy hunting in some way.
Yeah, so like almost like a hide and seek game. So you kind of like you're hiding it. Yeah. So I guess you're really tapping into a lot of different senses there. Are you tapping into the smell? Because I guess they're using the scent of the toy to kind of sniff that out and finding it. And then I guess we can kind of bring that back to rewarding that with a game of tug once they've found the toy, and then that's kind of again, that's giving them that outlet for
absolutely.
those behaviors.
Absolutely. Or if you've got a dog like mine who would be horrified if you played tug with their precious thing, letting them carry it and while you stroke them and engage with them, like often spaniels love that.
Okay.
They really want to be with you. It's very common. They want to be near you. But they want to hold the thing in their mouth and show you it. So even spending a bit of time doing that with them before you take the toy away from them. And for the dogs that like tug, yeah, absolutely, tug's a great way to end that search. Have a game of tug with the toy, and then hide it again. But the important thing is to hide it when the dog can't see it. In my experience, people have a great deal of difficulty with that as a concept.
Yeah.
Almost everybody, again, I have done research on this, and just over 50% of the people I researched, rather than the people that I'd asked to hide the toy, rather than hiding it, just over 50% of them threw it. Now, some of them had the dog, or waved it in front of the dog and then played a game of tug. I was like, this is really strange, but I think the concept is very difficult because we're used to toy play being quite a visual thing, where the dog sees us throw the toy, or we hold the toy and they're tugging on the toy. Actually, if we can have a little bit before those things, or instead of the chase, where the toy is hidden, then that can. But the next thing that dogs really like to do was chase. Not surprisingly, it was the next most popular. So any toy that can be thrown or can be dragged. For some dogs, toys flying through the air or being dragged quickly along the ground, like those ones with the long handles on them. Chasers, they're great. So toys like that are amazing for chase games and tug. They're good because you keep hold of them as well, so you can incorporate both games really, really easily. And then for the dogs who like the end stages of the motor sequence, so the bites, and some dogs will want to dissect toys as well. So those toys sometimes that they can push their noses into, they can be good dissect options, and they can get food out of them. But almost any toy that the dog likes having in their mouth is good for any of the bites. So I find larger kind of softer toys are good for a grab. The dogs will grab those quite hard. The longer, floppier ones often elicit that sort of head shake, that kill bites. Dogs enjoy that with those longer toys. For the dogs who like to hold and carry, it's really about trying to find what sort of shape is good for that individual dog. What sort of shape, what sort of texture do they like the most? So definitely.
I can definitely kind of thinking back to some of our toys that those chaser toys are really great for the one you said before, the last one, sorry, the grab, definitely that would be really good because actually you can make lots of movement with those. And then I'm thinking the balls with the toys with the balls on, so maybe the fantastic toys, great for carrying around, because actually they've got the weight behind them as well with the balls, so that would be.
Yeah, that would be great. And I think you've got some littler. I'm pretty sure the last time I looked on your website, you had some smaller toys. They're great. Smaller toys are great for hiding.
Okay.
Because
Awesome.
it's easier to get them hidden. So they're really good hide options for dogs, littler toys. So
Awesome.
I'm
What we'll do
often
is we'll put some suggestions of those that you've mentioned, or links to those in the comments or the description below. So yeah, great. Okay, so thanks so much, Tracy. It's been really, really good. And I really do think people will get a lot out of listening to us chatting about this. But where can people go to learn more about you? Have you got anything that they can go and grab to find out a bit more?
Absolutely. They can look on my website, which is bestdoglearningandstuff.co.uk. And I've got on there, I have got a free course called the High Prey Drive Challenge, which is free for people to join in with. It comes out by email. So whenever you join, you start getting emails about it. I've also got, what else have I got on my website at the moment? Summer Recall, downloadable, and I have got a quiz on my website as well that people can use to understand a bit more about what their particular dog likes. So it's quite a fun thing to look at. But yeah, people can find me on my website and join in there.
Awesome. So we'll put a link to your website in the notes section of the show. Thank you, Tracy, for taking part. And yeah, make sure you guys subscribe to get the next episode when it's out. Thanks, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.